Notre Dame heads down to Chapel Hill, North Carolina. They'll probably be leaving today, and they take on the 3-0 North Carolina Tar Heels. I will say, big picture, Ryan, when you look at this game, it is an absolute must-win for Notre Dame in order to kind of get their season back on the right track. If they don't win today, it's gonna be a big – or tomorrow, it's going to be – there's some red flags that need to get waved for this season. For North Carolina, this is a game where they're trying to achieve some legitimacy, right? The Tar Heels are 3-0. Their best win was, a 2-point win over Appalachian State, right? A 7-point win over Georgia State. Haven't been challenged yet, really, to the degree, but I think the App State win on the road was a good win. It was an ugly win, but it was a good win. So both teams have a lot at stake, Ryan. But for Notre Dame specifically, this is a game, and we've referred to it as a get-right game for the offense. I think this is for the whole team. This is a get-right game, Ryan. This is the kind of game where if Notre Dame is able to go out and win this game, get a second win on the road, Power 5 victory on the road going into the bye week, the mindset of this team changes a lot, and I think some of the pressure comes off. But the opposite is true. If they go to the bye week and they have to sit for 2 weeks with a loss, getting ready to go out to Vegas and play BYU, you start getting a little bit nervous about the potential wheels falling off. So I do think there's a lot at stake for the Irish on Saturday.
The bye week is the biggest key for me, right? It's the fact of where this game lies with what has happened so far. 1-3 in a bye week, going into kind of the meat of your schedule a little bit. It's tough, man. And you talk about demoralizing a little bit. Like, it could be very easy for players to kind of just check out, right? Like, it could be very easy at 1-3 in a bye week to just kind of feel sorry for yourself. And then the national media perspective obviously is just going to rail you all for 2 weeks about how you're just not good and Marcus Freeman's not the guy. And there's going to be a lot of repercussions if Notre Dame loses this football game, and a lot of negativity around the program for a team that has had the entire offseason was very optimistic, and then obviously with how it's gotten started, it's killed a lot of the momentum in that regard. But in the other way, to your point, if you're sitting at 2-2 in the bye week after what you've had to deal with the first couple of games, beating North Carolina, kind of resting a little bit and then getting a little bit of the energy back, like that would be big time, I think, for this team. Because again, I keep talking about this, and it's definitely not an excuse, because that I have high standards for this team, and I need to see a championship in my lifetime. So there's no excuses, but Notre Dame is a younger team. There is, right? So right. I think if you win and go into a bye week, I feel like that could kind of boost the energy and the confidence of a younger football team. And I think that could be absolutely vital for this team heading down the stretch. And then obviously just kind of securing a little bit of momentum that's been lost the first couple games.
I think it's a young offense, and that's the side of the ball that's been the primary reason for the 1-2 start. I mean, the defense has been far from perfect, but the defense has played well enough for you to be 3-0 right now. Has the defense been great? No. They were great at times against Cal, but not great for 60 minutes against Cal. But I think they played well enough to where you should be undefeated right now. And I think if you bounce back and beat North Carolina on the road, you're 2-2, and now you're just one game off of where most people thought they would be, which is 3-1. And now you can just look at it and say, hey, Marshall, we screwed up. We didn't come to play that day. We didn't do what we needed to do, and we went out and got beat. When that happens, you can kind of point to some similar games for good teams in the past if you can get on a roll. We've talked about Ohio State losing to Virginia Tech in 2014. That was a mediocre Virginia Tech team, better than Marshall, but not a ton better than Marshall. You lost at home by 2 touchdowns. And so we've seen it, but that perspective only becomes a legitimate thing to say if you beat Carolina and go on a win streak.
Yep. And
that's really the key of it, right? is being able to kind of start getting some W's, getting some momentum. Because I think this team needs confidence in all phases of the game. I think that the combination of – I'm going to say this, and I people to let me explain. I think there'd be less questioning and less lack of confidence if the previous coach was here. And what I mean by that is it would be the team would still be kind of being to themselves. Like, we've talked a lot about how under the previous coach, the players felt like they needed to take more ownership of the team. because there wasn't a lot of trust there with the staff. And I feel like that would still be the case. There wouldn't be as much questioning, and it would just be like, this is what it's how it's always been. I think because they did put a level of trust in this coaching staff, and it is a new coaching staff, that when things start going south, it can become a lot easier to point fingers. Well, Coach Elson wouldn't have done this, or Coach Alexander wouldn't have done that, or Coach Quinn wouldn't have done this, right? I think it's a lot easier to go down to that trap when you are not having success. And so I think a win in this game squashes all that, in my opinion. And I think that is another reason why this game is so incredibly important. Because, hey, guys, we screwed up against Marshall, right? We screwed up. There's no excuses. But, hey, we've righted the ship. Now it's time to let's get healthy in the bye week. Let's practice. Let's work out some things. Let's get where we need to get to, and then let's start rolling. Because if big picture, Ryan, if they can win these next 2 games, Notre Dame will go on a run. Mm-hmm. I mean, these are the 2 best teams this week, and then the 2 weeks against BYU. It's the 2 best teams are going to play up until Clemson, right? And so now they can also lose to every team they play except UNLV if they play like they did against Marshall. My point is, in order to beat these next 2 teams, you have to right the ship and not be doing the things you did that got you beat against Marshall, right? Yes. Now, will they be that team? We do not know. They have a lot to prove. That's why this game is big. But I do feel like in order to do what they need to do to beat North Carolina, they're going to have to right some of the stuff that we've seen the first 3 weeks. That's the big key.
I mean, especially on the offensive side of the football, right? I mean, if you're talking about just Brian, like they can't play like they've been playing over the last couple of games and score with North Carolina. Like, it's just impossible, right? Like, that's just not going to happen. So to your point, yeah, you have to right the ship a little bit because you just can't play the style that you've been playing and win this football game, I think, right? Like, right. People are going to point again at hey, you only gave up 21 points to Ohio State. And sure, can Notre Dame limit the impact of North Carolina? But the fact of the matter is that you're going to have to score a little bit. Like, you're going to have to. And score this is a team that's going to force you to get uncomfortable, right? We've talked a lot about that this week with the offensive staff at North Carolina with what they've been doing, right? So that Notre Dame will have to right the ship because they'll have to continue to get better defensively to stop some of these talented playmakers and this really talented quarterback. And offensively, they're going to have to score. You're going to have to. Like, this is not a game that you're going to win most likely 20-17. Like, this is just not that game, in my opinion, right? This is a game where you're going to have to score a lot more than you've been scoring in the last couple games to win this football game. So I agree with you completely in the sense of yeah, definitely. They're definitely going to have to change because they can't play the same style and beat this North Carolina team, in my opinion.
Right. So, Ryan, obviously we talked about what a lot is at stake. I think the other thing, too, is if the offense cannot get right in this game, I think more than anything else, that would be the biggest red flag to me. If you cannot get right this game, you have to ask yourself, I don't know when or if it'll happen, right? Like, the offense has played bad the first 3 games. We have seen things we've seen teams in the past kind of come out on one side of the ball early in the season and not play great and then get better. The most recent example that I can think of with Notre Dame, where they actually got good, not just last year where they struggled and it got a lot better later in the year, but last year, even with the early season struggles, they still played really well on offense against Florida State in the opener. There hasn't been a game like that this year. But I go back to the 2018 season when Notre Dame, kind of came out early in the year and really they just weren't real sharp on offense early in the year. They scored 24 points in a win over Michigan. They only had 302 yards of offense. They scored 24 points in a win over an ugly win over Ball State, ran for 117 yards, and then had a 22-17 win over a Vanderbilt team and had 380 yards of offense. And that was a Vanderbilt team that finished the year 6-7. A week later lost by 23 to South Carolina. And then, of course, they make the change of quarterback and from Brandon Wimbush to Ian Book. And then, of course, that sparks them to kind of come out the next 3 weeks and just be on fire offensively. Scored 56 against Wake, 38 against, and went for 550 yards against Stanford. And then, of course, a 45-point outburst against Virginia Tech. So the offense has been worse so far than it was in 2018. And I don't think the breakout will be quite as strong as it was. But if they can have a breakout, get into the 30 points against North Carolina, you at least start to build some momentum to get this group going, because I don't care what anybody says. This is a group that, to me, should be a lot better than it is. A lot better than it is. I'm watching Tennessee score 50-plus points a game with Hendon Hooker and Cedric Tillman, and I'm thinking, is the talent there that much better at the skill positions in the offensive line? And is a quarterback really that much of a difference between 18 points a game and 52 points a game? I just don't think that it is. I think it's about mindset. It's about scheme. It's about teaching. It's about play calling. It's about building around the talent you have. And so I just want to see this team start to do that and get them. And look, Ryan, if they're doing the things schematically that they need to do, and they're asking Lorenzo Styles to do things that he's good at, and asking Braden Lindsey to do things he's good at, and same thing with Tobias and Jaden Thomas and the other tight ends and Chris Tyree and Audric Estime, and they're still not that good, then we can say, you know what? There's a talent problem. We've seen it now. The problem that we've had at Notre Dame in past years, and the problem that we're having now, is they're not doing those things. We know what Braden Lindsey's good at, and they're not asking him or not letting him do those things. Let's see how that goes. And that's the big thing for me, is I want to see that start to happen. And then if it's still not good enough, then we can say, you know what? There's a quarterback problem. There's a receiver problem. There's all those type of things. And I think that's that's to me what it boils down to for me.
Yeah. I mean, Brian, we talked about it yesterday, right? And I kind of will reiterate it again. There's no excuses this week. Like, there's not, right? Like, I want this staff and this team to just come out and just let everything out there, man. Like, I don't want it to be a simplistic and I don't want it to be, well, not simplistic. That's not the right word. I don't want this to be an approach where you're just kind of like, okay, they're just trying to keep the ball away. And then after the game, you're like, oh, well, this happened and that happened. And I don't want to hear any of that, man. And for the most part, I mean, I'll give Marcus Freeman some credit. He hasn't really shied away from it, right? Like he said, we need to play better and we need to coach better and all the stuff that he should be saying, right? So it's not like he's just saying oh, well, we can't do this, we can't do that. So
we haven't caught any breaks where,
right. Yeah. There's not excuses being.
You haven't heard the my guys versus Kelly guys thing like Kelly did with the Weiss players. You haven't heard any of that stuff. You haven't heard any of that stuff.
Yeah. But from our perspective, I just don't want there to be a approach in this game where you can potentially create a scapegoat, right? You can create an out oh, yeah, you're right. This guy and that guy and whatever. I don't want there to be an excuse this week. I just want them to be aggressive, let it all out there. And if Notre Dame loses, Notre Dame loses. But at least at that point, I'll have a much better understanding of what this team is. I will 100%, like you said, you'll know if it's a talent problem. You'll know if it's a coaching problem. You'll know if it's a scheme problem, whatever. You'll know the exact answers because I think there's been points like first game with Tommy, everyone wanted to talk about, right? Not a well-called game. I agree. Last game, I think some players didn't make plays, if I'm being completely honest. I don't think it was all coaching last game. So I want to know.
I thought the coaching was actually pretty decent last game, game plan-wise and play calling-wise. I mean, it wasn't exactly how I would have done it, but it was – there was opportunities there for a lot more. Agreed. And
there was, 100%. And there was adjustments that were made in that game, which give you hope. I mean, against Marshall, how many guys were open, man? It wasn't like it was just this scared, conservative team. There were shots taken in Marshall. Yeah. So there's been spurts of questionable coaching. There's been spurts of players not making plays. But regardless, I don't want there to be any excuses from the coaching side of things, I guess is my main takeaway, right? I don't want it to say oh, Tommy's limiting this offense. I want everything to open up from a team perspective, really. And I want to know exactly if this is a team issue, this is a player issue, this is a coaching issue. I want to have a full scope understanding because we are week 4 now, right? We're 4 games in. We should start to get a much deeper understanding of just what this team is ultimately.